Some cages aren't made of iron bars, but of gold diamonds and the suffocating weight of a perfect life. For Genevieve Sterling, her penthouse overlooking Central Park was just such a cage. She was the beautiful, graceful wife of millionaire real estate magnate Damien Blackwood, a man who gave her everything except the one thing she craved: respect. But what he didn't know was that his perfectly curated wife had a past he couldn't fathom and a secret weapon he never saw coming. This isn't just a story about a divorce. It's about a woman pregnant and pushed to her limit, who decides to burn down her gilded cage, revealing a power that will bring an entire empire to its knees. The penthouse on the 75th floor of 157 was less a home and more a museum exhibit on wealth. Cold white marble floors stretched into an abyss of glass, offering a panoramic, godlike view of Manhattan. Every piece of furniture was a statement, every painting a blue-chip investment, and every surface was polished to a terrifyingly sterile gleam. This was the world Damien Blackwood had built, and Genevieve Sterling was his most prized acquisition. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple. Damien with his sharp Italian suits, impossibly perfect teeth, and the predatory confidence of a man who had never been told no. And Jen, his ethereal wife whose quiet grace and art history degree made her the perfect hostess and a beautiful, non-threatening accessory at his side. He loved to show her off at galas, her hand resting delicately on his arm, a silent testament to his success. Tonight was the annual Blackwood Holdings Foundation Gala, a night where New York's elite gathered to write checks and praise Damien's manufactured philanthropy. Genevieve stood beside him, a vision, in a deep emerald gown that clung to her slender frame. The fabric was a soft, forgiving silk, a deliberate choice to hide the barely there swell of her abdomen. She was 3 months pregnant, a fact only she and Damien knew. "Darling, you look stunning," Damien murmured, his hand possessively on the small of her back. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were scanning the room, calculating networking. "Did you speak with the Wertheimers? He's on the board of the new MoMA extension. A good man to know." "Yes, Damien. We discussed Venetian art of the 16th century." She replied, her voice a placid melodic whisper that she had perfected over 5 years of marriage. He patted her back dismissively. "Wonderful. Just try to steer the conversation towards the Hudson Yards project next time. Art doesn't fund itself." He turned away before she could respond, clapping a portly councilman on the shoulder, his laughter booming across the string quartet's gentle melody. That was their life. He spoke of projects and profits. She was expected to speak of painters and prose. He saw the world as a chessboard. She was a beautiful static queen, powerful only in her proximity to the king, yet never allowed to make a move of her own. Before him, she'd had a dream, a small but promising online auction platform for emerging artists. A year into their marriage, after she'd presented him with a meticulously researched business plan, he had patted her head. "It's a sweet little hobby, Jen," he'd said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But you don't need to worry your pretty head about business. I make enough for both of us. Why don't you focus on the redecoration of the Hamptons estate?" The project had mysteriously lost its seed funding a week later. She had been devastated, but he had soothed her with a new Cartier bracelet and a trip to Paris, and she, young and desperately in love, had allowed herself to believe it was just bad luck. She had allowed herself to be placed inside the gilded cage. The pregnancy was supposed to be a new beginning. When she'd told him, her heart thumping with a mixture of terror and hope, he had beamed, but his words had chilled her to the bone. A boy he'd declared, not asked. A Blackwood heir. Finally. This will solidify everything. Our legacy. He hadn't asked how she felt. He hadn't touched her stomach with wonder. He had simply seen the next piece in his dynastic puzzle, another asset to be managed. That was the moment the last shimmering thread of hope had snapped. She wasn't his partner. She was his vessel, the mother of his legacy. And she would not bring a child into this cold, transactional world, not like this. Later that evening, as Damien was on stage accepting an award and speaking eloquently about family values and building a future, Genevieve slipped away. She found her purse, her fingers closing around the thick, crisp manila envelope tucked inside. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilarating freedom. She walked back to their prime table at the front, her steps measured and deliberate. The room was bathed in a warm, golden light, but all she felt was ice in her veins. She waited until his speech was over, until the applause thundered through the grand ballroom of the Carlisle Hotel. As he stepped down from the stage, basking in the adoration of the crowd, she approached him. "A magnificent speech, darling," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "Thank you, Jen. I thought it went rather well," he said, preening. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, a public display for the circling photographers from Vanity Fair and the New York Times. In that moment, under the blinding flash of the cameras, she slid the envelope from behind her back and placed it flat against his chest. "What's this?" he asked, his smile faltering slightly. "A surprise." You could say that she said, her voice dropping, so only he could hear it. "That's from my lawyer, Damien. I'm filing for divorce." He froze. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of sheer, uncomprehending shock. His hand, which had been on its way to take the envelope, stopped mid-air. The photographers, sensing a shift in the mood, clicked their cameras with renewed fervor. "What did you just say?" He hissed, his grip tightening on her arm. She didn't flinch. She met his furious gaze with a calmness that terrified him. "I believe my words were clear. I'm leaving you. And for the sake of our child, I will not be doing it quietly." She pulled her arm from his grasp, turned her back on her stunned husband, and walked away. She didn't look back as the whispers erupted behind her, as the first flash of panic crossed Damien Blackwood's perfectly composed face. She walked out of the ballroom, out of the Carlisle Hotel, and into the cool night air of the city, taking her first breath as a free woman. The cage door was open. The war had just begun. The drive back to the penthouse was a blur of impotent rage for Damien. The divorce papers sat on the supple leather seat beside him, feeling heavier than a tombstone. Genevieve was divorcing him. The thought was so absurd, so utterly nonsensical, it felt like a line from a poorly written play. He had given her everything. A life of unimaginable luxury, a social standing she could have only dreamed of, a name, his name, that opened every door in the city. He stormed into the cold, silent apartment. Her scent, a subtle mix of jasmine and old books, still lingered in the air, mocking him. He stalked into their cavernous walk-in closet. Her side was half empty. The everyday clothes were gone. Only the couture gowns remained hanging like the husks of a life she had shed. On her jewelry stand, the massive 15-carat diamond ring he'd given her sat alone, its facets catching the light, a cold and glittering insult. Inconceivable, he snarled to the empty room. He pulled out his phone, his thumb jabbing at the screen, to dial his lawyer, Arthur Finch. Finch was less a lawyer and more a corporate executioner. a man who dismantled lives with the surgical precision of a sociopath. "Arthur, it's Damien," he barked when the call connected. "We have a problem. My wife has lost her mind." Damien Finch's voice was a dry rasp, devoid of emotion. "It's 11 o'clock at night." "She's divorcing me." Damien spat, pacing the marble floor. "She served me papers at my own gala." There was a pause on the other end, the first hint of surprise Finch had shown in years. "I see. That's theatrical. Has she retained counsel?" "How would I know? I want you to crush her, Arthur. I want you to leave her with nothing. Remind her what that prenup she signed says. She walks away with her clothes and a pittance for a severance. I want to see the light go out of her eyes when she realizes she can't afford her morning latte." "Consider it done," Finch said. "First thing in the morning, I'll file a motion to freeze all joint assets and cut off her credit cards. We'll starve her out. By the end of the week, she'll come crawling back, begging for forgiveness." Good Damien said, a sliver of his control returning. This was his world, the world of threats, leverage, and financial annihilation. He was comfortable here. Genevieve, the gentle art historian, stood no chance. The next morning, Genevieve sat in a corner suite at the St. Regis, the morning sun streaming through the windows. The suite was a temporary sanctuary, paid for by a card Damien knew nothing about. Across from her, in a plush armchair, sat Victoria Croft. She was a legend in New York's divorce courts, a woman known for her razor-sharp intellect, impeccable style, and a client list that included rock stars and royalty. With her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon and eyes that missed nothing, she exuded an aura of unshakable competence. "He's made his first move," Victoria said, scrolling through a tablet. "Arthur Finch has filed a motion to freeze your assets. Your Amex has been declined." Genevieve simply nodded, taking a calm sip of her tea. "I expected as much." Victoria raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Most women in your position would be in a state of panic right now." "You seem prepared." "I've had 5 years to prepare." "Victoria." Genevieve said, her voice soft but laced with steel. 5 years of being underestimated. It's a powerful advantage. "Indeed," Victoria mused. "Finch's entire strategy is predicated on that underestimation. He sees you as a trophy wife with no resources of her own. He believes he can bully you into submission. Our first job is to disabuse him of that notion." Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her lips. "And here we go. It's Finch. He wants to schedule a preliminary meeting. He suggests your client might want to reconsider her rash actions before she finds herself irrevocably compromised." "Tell Mr. Finch that I am available to meet," Genevieve said, "and tell him not to worry about my financial situation. My resources are more than adequate." The meeting took place 2 days later in a sterile, glass-walled conference room at Finch's firm, a place that reeked of money and quiet desperation. Damien sat at the head of the table, flanked by Finch and 2 junior associates. He looked imperious, confident, ready to watch his wife crumble. Genevieve walked in with Victoria Croft at her side. She was not dressed in the soft pastels Damien preferred, but in a tailored navy blue pantsuit that screamed authority. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze cool and unwavering. Finch began, his voice smooth and condescending. "Mrs. Blackwood Genevieve, we are here today to discuss an amicable resolution. Damien is prepared to be generous considering the circumstances and the clear stipulations of your prenuptial agreement. He slid a document across the table. As you know, the agreement you signed waives any and all claims to Mr. Blackwood's holdings, both current and future. You are entitled to a one-time payment of $1 million, contingent on the signing of a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Damien leaned forward. It's a very generous offer, Jen. More than enough for you to start a new quiet life. Don't throw it away. Victoria Croft didn't even glance at the paper. She let the silence hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment before she spoke. Mr. Finch. She began, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. My client finds your offer and your tone insulting. We will not be accepting a pittance, as I believe your client so charmingly phrased it. Damien's eyes widened slightly. How did she know what he'd said? Victoria continued her focus entirely on the flustered lawyer. Furthermore, we will not be intimidated by your attempts at financial coercion. As for the prenuptial agreement, we contend that it is null and void. Finch laughed a short, sharp bark. On what grounds? It was drafted by the best legal minds in the country. It's ironclad. On the grounds of fraudulent inducement, Victoria said calmly. You see, my client was induced to sign that agreement based on a series of promises Mr. Blackwood made regarding his support for her career ambitions. Ambitions he then actively and covertly sabotaged. We have evidence of this, by the way. Damien's blood ran cold. The online art platform. It was impossible. No one knew. Finch sputtered. That's a baseless, ludicrous accusation. Is it? Victoria smiled. We can discuss the details of that in discovery. But for now, let's address the immediate issue. You've frozen my client's access to her marital funds. A predictable, if brutish, tactic. It's also irrelevant. She placed her own file on the table and opened it. My client has secured a litigation fund to cover all legal and personal expenses for the duration of these proceedings. The fund is substantial. More than enough to see this through to a jury trial, should it come to that. We are prepared for a war of attrition, Mr. Finch. The question is your client, Damien stared at Genevieve, truly seeing her for the first time? The quiet, docile woman he had married was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman with a plan, a strategy, and an unnerving confidence. Litigation fund, he scoffed, trying to regain control. Who's funding you? Jen. Did you find another rich man to leech off of already? Genevieve finally spoke, her voice clear and ringing in the silent room. My backing is a private matter, Damien, but I assure you, you can't afford to compete with it. So here is our counteroffer. 50% of all marital assets, a permanent restraining order, and full unencumbered custody of our child. And we are just getting started. She stood up, followed by Victoria. We'll see you in court. As they walked out, Damien was left staring at their retreating forms, a cold dread seeping into his bones. This wasn't a simple divorce. It was a coup, and he had no idea who he was really fighting against. Damien Blackwood did not like mysteries. His life was a carefully constructed edifice of known quantities and predictable outcomes. Genevieve's sudden transformation from a docile wife into a formidable adversary was a mystery he was determined to solve, and like any business problem, he intended to throw money at it until it yielded a solution. I want to know everything, he commanded Arthur Finch over the phone, his voice tight with fury. I want to know who she's talking to, where she's eating, and most importantly, where this litigation fund is coming from. Hire the best private investigators. I don't care what it costs. Dig into her past. Every friend, every family member, every ex-boyfriend. There's a man behind this. There has to be. Finch, eager to reassert his value, after the disastrous first meeting hired a discreet but ruthlessly efficient firm, run by a former Mossad agent named Kobe. They were the best in the business, known for their ability to unearth secrets buried for decades. For 2 weeks, Kobe's team shadowed Genevieve. They watched her move from the saint, Regis, to a lavishly furnished 3-bedroom apartment in a pre-war building on Park Avenue, the kind of place with old money and even older doormen who were impervious to bribes. They documented her meetings with Victoria Croft, her prenatal yoga classes, her quiet lunches with a small circle of loyal friends. The reports that landed on Damien's desk were infuriatingly mundane. There was no secret lover, no clandestine meetings with a new benefactor. She was living the life of a wealthy, single, expectant mother. But the money was clearly flowing from somewhere. The apartment's rent alone was astronomical. Victoria Croft's retainer was the stuff of legends. Kobe's team shifted their focus to her past. Genevieve's life before Damien had been modest but respectable. She grew up in upstate New York, the daughter of a university professor and a librarian, both deceased. She had attended Vassar on a scholarship, excelling in her studies. There were a few college boyfriends, none of them wealthy or influential. Her record was pristine, almost unnaturally so. "It's too clean," Damien growled, throwing a file across his expansive office. "Nobody is this clean. Dig deeper." Kobe's investigators went back further, combing through public records, birth certificates, and archived newspapers. And then they found it. A small, almost imperceptible anomaly. Genevieve wasn't born a Sterling. Her original birth certificate listed her name as Genevieve Thorne Sterling. Her mother's name was listed as Eleanor Thorne. The father was Robert Sterling, but the name Thorne triggered a flag in one of Kobe's deep dive databases. "We found a possible family connection," Kobe reported to Finch, his voice laced with professional excitement. "Her maternal grandfather. We think his name is Sebastian Thorne." Damien, who was on the speakerphone, let out a derisive laugh. "Sebastian Thorne. You mean the Sebastian Thorne, the founder of Ethelred Technologies, the reclusive tech billionaire? You're telling me my wife, the art history major from Poughkeepsie, is the granddaughter of a man who's practically a ghost, a man richer than God? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's a common name. Find the right one." "We're trying to confirm it, Mr. Blackwood," Kobe said. "The man is notoriously private. There are almost no public records linking him to any family. But her mother, Eleanor, matches the profile of a daughter he supposedly disowned in the late 80s for marrying a penniless academic." Damien was unconvinced. It was too fantastic, too much like a soap opera plot. Genevieve had never mentioned any family besides her parents. She'd told him they were all she had. Had their entire marriage been a lie? The confirmation came not from Kobe, but from a source far more direct and infinitely more terrifying. Damien was in a tense board meeting discussing the falling share price of Blackwood Holdings. A dip attributed by market analysts to the instability of Mr. Blackwood's high-profile divorce when his personal assistant, a perpetually nervous young man named David, tiptoed into the room. "Mr. Blackwood." "I'm so sorry to interrupt," he whispered, his face pale. "But there's a call for you." He said it was urgent. "I'm in a meeting," David Damien snapped. "Take a message." "I tried, sir." The man said, and I quote, "Tell Mr. Blackwood that Sebastian Thorne is on the line. He can take the call now, or he can take it when he's begging for a loan from my bank in 5 years." The boardroom fell silent. The names of the board members, titans of industry themselves, paled at the mention of that name. Sebastian Thorne didn't make calls. He moved markets with a single whispered word. Damien felt a cold pit form in his stomach. He snatched the phone from his assistant. "This is Damien Blackwood." The voice on the other end was not loud or aggressive. It was calm, aged, and carried an authority that made the blood in Damien's veins turn to ice. It was the voice of a man who had not needed to raise his voice in half a century. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Sebastian Thorne. I am calling you once and only once to make my position clear." Damien swallowed, trying to compose himself. "Mr. Thorne, this is an honor. I'm not sure what this is regarding." "Don't play games with me, son. You know precisely what this is regarding. It's regarding my granddaughter, Genevieve." The way he said her name was filled with a fierce, ancient protectiveness. "You married her. You underestimated her. And now you have decided to bully her. This was a grave miscalculation on your part." Damien was speechless. It was true. "Let me be simple, so that even a man who builds gaudy glass boxes for a living can understand." Thorne continued, his voice as sharp as broken glass. "Genevieve wanted for nothing, yet she chose to build a life on her own terms. She fell in love with a man she believed saw her for who she was, not who her grandfather was. It seems she was mistaken. I loved her." Damien stammered the word, sounding hollow, even to himself. "Your version of love." "Mr. Blackwood appears to be a form of possession. That is an error you will now rectify. You will give my granddaughter everything she asks for. You will not fight her. You will not slander her. You will not draw this out. Because if you do, I will not simply fund her legal defense. That for me is pocket change." There was a chilling pause. "No, if you fight her, I will personally turn my attention to the complete and utter dismantling of your little real estate empire. I will short your stock into oblivion. I will buy up your debt. I will fund your competitors. I will expose every shady deal and every zoning variance you've ever greased a palm to get. By the time I am finished, Mr. Blackwood, the name Blackwood Holdings will be a case study in business schools on spectacular failure. Do I make myself clear?" Damien stood by the window of his boardroom, staring out at the city he had conquered, feeling it all slip through his fingers. He was a millionaire, a king in his own world. But he had just been threatened by a god. "Yes," Damien said, his voice barely a whisper. "Perfectly clear." The line went dead. Damien slowly lowered the phone. The board members stared at him, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. He had picked a fight with his wife. He had just discovered he had declared war on an emperor. The revelation of Sebastian Thorne's involvement changed the battlefield entirely. It was no longer a divorce. It was a siege. Damien, for the first time in his adult life, felt a genuine, gnawing fear. Thorne's threat had not been idle boasting. It was a clinical promise from a man who had crushed bigger companies than Blackwood Holdings for sport. His immediate instinct was to capitulate. Give Genevieve what she wanted, and pray Thorne's all-seeing eye would turn elsewhere. He instructed a terrified Arthur Finch to draw up a new, far more generous settlement offer. But in Genevieve's camp, the objective had shifted. This was no longer just about securing her financial freedom and her child's future. The confirmation of Damien's treachery regarding her old business idea had reawakened a deep, burning sense of injustice. He hadn't just dismissed her. He had actively conspired to keep her in her gilded cage. It was a betrayal more profound than any affair. He didn't just break my heart. Victoria Genevieve explained, her hands resting on her growing belly as she stood by the window of her new apartment. He tried to break my spirit. He wanted me to believe I was incapable, that my only value was as his wife. If I just take the money and walk away, he'll never understand what he did. He'll just see it as the cost of doing business with Sebastian Thorne. Victoria Croft nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. So this is about accountability. It's about justice, Genevieve corrected her. I want him to acknowledge what he took from me, not the money. My dream. Victoria's strategic mind went into overdrive. Thorne's backing gives us leverage, but a public fight can be messy, especially with a child on the way. If we can find more something that proves a pattern of deceit, we can force a settlement on our terms that include more than just a check. And so while Damien was frantically trying to build a firewall around his finances, Genevieve's team launched their own counter-investigation. But they weren't looking for hidden assets. They were digging for buried truths. They hired a team of forensic accountants and ethical hackers, people who could follow digital breadcrumbs that Kobe's old-school investigators might have missed. They started with Genevieve's failed business venture, the art platform she had called Canvas. She had poured her heart into it, securing initial interest from a boutique venture capital firm, Atherton Capital. They had been enthusiastic, ready to sign a term sheet. Then in the space of 48 hours, they had pulled out, citing a sudden loss of confidence in the platform's scalability. The call had crushed her. Damien had been so comforting, holding her as she cried, telling her it was for the best. Genevieve's new team focused on Atherton Capital. It didn't take long for the forensic accountants to find a thread. A week after Atherton pulled their funding from Canvas, a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands made a significant investment in one of Atherton's other larger projects. It was a sweetener, a quiet thank you. The hackers then traced the shell corporation's digital signature. It took them through a labyrinth of servers and proxy accounts, but they finally found its origin point. The initial transfer of funds had come from a subsidiary account of Blackwood Holdings, authorized by a single person, Damien Blackwood. The evidence was irrefutable. Encrypted emails, transfer logs, offshore account statements. Damien hadn't just let her fail. He had paid to make her fail. He had sabotaged her dream, to keep her dependent on him, to ensure his was the only world she would ever know. Seeing the proof laid out in a neat file on Victoria Croft's mahogany desk felt like a physical blow to Genevieve. The memory of his comforting arms as she wept over her failure now felt grotesque, a serpent's embrace. Every word of encouragement he had ever offered was a lie. Every comforting gesture a calculated act of manipulation. "There's more," the lead investigator said, his face grim. He slid another folder across the desk. This might be harder to see. This file detailed Damien's personal life. Genevieve had never suspected him of infidelity. He was too obsessed with the perfect facade of their marriage. But the investigators found a pattern. He didn't have cheap flings. His betrayals were more insidious. For the past 3 years, he had been involved in a long-term, on-again, off-again affair with a woman named Cassandra Lowell. Cassandra was a prominent art dealer, a woman Genevieve had considered a friend. They had sat on charity boards together. Cassandra had advised her on acquisitions for their private collection. She had been to their home for dinner countless times, smiling at Genevieve, complimenting her dress, all while sleeping with her husband. The investigators had uncovered reservations at boutique hotels under false names, credit card receipts from restaurants. On nights Damien claimed to be working late, even flight manifests for business trips, where Cassandra had coincidentally been on the same private jet. This betrayal felt different. The business sabotage was a crime against her ambition. This was a crime against her heart, her trust, her friendships. It made a mockery of their entire social life, turning every memory of a shared laugh or a friendly chat with Cassandra into a bitter, poisonous charade. It was proof that in Damien's world, everyone and everything was transactional. Loyalty was a commodity, and his wife's trust was just another asset to be leveraged and spent. Genevieve sat in silence for a long time. The documents spread before her. The pain was sharp and visceral, but beneath it, something else was crystallizing. Not weakness, but a cold, hard resolve. She had mourned the loss of her marriage. Now she saw there was nothing to mourn. It had all been an illusion, a beautiful, elaborate lie she had been told, and that she had told herself. Damien hadn't just broken their vows. He had built their entire life upon a foundation of deceit. She looked up at Victoria, her eyes clear and free of tears. "He didn't just build a cage for me," she said, her voice quiet, but vibrating with a newfound strength. "He made me believe I belonged there. He made me think the cage was a home." She pushed the files back across the desk. "Let's tear it all down," she said. "Not with Thorne's money. With this. With the truth." The siege was over. The counter-offensive was about to begin. The conference room at Victoria Croft's law office felt like a war room. The new evidence, the meticulously documented proof of Damien's sabotage and his long-term affair, had shifted the legal landscape from a simple divorce settlement to a full-scale character assassination waiting to be deployed. "The fraudulent inducement claim is now airtight," Victoria stated, her fingers steepled as she addressed Genevieve and a junior counsel. "We can prove he entered the marriage contract under false pretenses. He feigned support for your career while actively ensuring its failure. That alone could be grounds to invalidate the entire prenuptial agreement." She paused, her gaze meeting Genevieve's. "And the affair with Cassandra Lowell. That's the emotional bombshell. While adultery is no fault in New York, we can use it to establish a pattern of deceit that will decimate his character in front of any judge or mediator. He has painted himself as the wronged husband. We can repaint him as a manipulative sociopath." Damien, meanwhile, was operating under the delusion that his only problem was Sebastian Thorne's bank account. He was hemorrhaging money on legal fees, trying to shield his assets and counter the moves he assumed Thorne was making in the financial markets. He had no idea the real attack was coming from a different direction entirely. Arthur Finch, confident that the prenup was his shield, requested a formal mediation. He intended to present Damien's new, generous offer, a settlement of $25 million the penthouse, and a gag order, believing the sheer amount would shock Genevieve into submission and appease her mysterious benefactor. They met on neutral ground in the offices of a retired judge, who now served as one of the city's most sought-after mediators. The air was thick with tension. Damien sat stiffly, refusing to look at Genevieve. He saw her growing belly and felt a flicker of something not paternal warmth, but a renewed sense of ownership. That was his heir she was carrying, his legacy. "We are here to be reasonable," Finch began, launching into his rehearsed speech. "Mr. Blackwood is prepared to offer a settlement that goes far beyond the terms of the legally binding prenuptial agreement in the interest of avoiding a protracted and painful public battle, especially with a child involved. He laid out the terms. It was a staggering amount of money, enough to make headlines. Victoria Croft listened patiently until he was finished. She didn't respond or counter. Instead, she slid a single, slim file across the table to the mediator. "Before we discuss Mr. Blackwood's offer," she said, "we feel it's important for all parties to be operating with the same set of facts." The mediator, a stern-faced man named Judge Alistair Hayes, opened the file. Finch and Damien watched smugly at first, then with growing unease, as Hayes's expression shifted from professional detachment to one of visible shock. He read for several minutes, his silence sucking the air out of the room. Finally he looked up, his gaze falling on Damien with undisguised contempt. "Finch Hayes," said his voice a low growl. "Is your client aware of the contents of this file?" Finch looked bewildered. We have not been privy to that file." "Perhaps you should be," Victoria said, sweetly. She slid a second copy across to him. Damien watched as his lawyer's face went from ruddy to ashen. He saw Finch's eyes scan the Atherton Capital transfer logs, the damning emails, the hotel receipts under the name Mr. Smith that corresponded with Cassandra Lowell's travel schedule. Damien's carefully constructed world imploded in that silent, carpeted room. This is illegally obtained information," Finch stammered, his voice cracking. "Inadmissible. It's a violation of privacy. Everything in that file was obtained legally through digital forensics and standard investigative channels. Arthur." "You'll find no laws were broken," Victoria countered smoothly. "But a great many vows and promises certainly were." Damien finally looked at Genevieve. He expected to see tears rage the emotional chaos he was so adept at managing. Instead, he saw a placid, unnerving calm. She wasn't the victim. She was the executioner. "What do you want, Jen?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The bravado was gone, replaced by the raw fear of a man who was utterly exposed. It was Victoria who answered. "The prenup is void. We are no longer discussing a settlement based on its terms. We are now discussing a punitive settlement based on emotional distress fraud and the deliberate sabotage of my client's career. The financial demand has not changed 50% of all marital assets, but we are adding new conditions." She slid a third document across the table. It was their list of demands. 1. Full financial disclosure and division. 50% of Blackwood Holdings' value, all real estate and investments acquired during the marriage. 2. The Canvas Foundation. Damien would provide $100 million in seed funding for a new charitable foundation to be named the Canvas Foundation. It would provide grants and mentorship to female entrepreneurs in the arts and tech sectors. Genevieve would have sole, uncontested control of the board. 3. Public apology. Damien was to issue a formal public statement to be published in the Wall Street Journal, admitting to his unethical interference, which led to the loss of funding for Genevieve's original business platform. He would not be required to admit to the affair a small mercy. Victoria had advised was strategic. It allowed him to save a sliver of public face, making him more likely to sign. 4. Custody and inheritance. Genevieve would have sole physical and legal custody of their child. The child would bear her surname, Thorne Sterling. The child would also be immediately vested as the primary heir to 51% of Damien's remaining half of Blackwood holdings, placed in a trust managed by appointees of Sebastian Thorne. Damien stared at the list, his face a mask of disbelief. This wasn't a settlement. It was a dismantling. She wasn't just taking his money. She was taking his company, his legacy, his very name from his own child. The foundation was the ultimate humiliation, forcing him to fund the very dream he had tried to kill. "This is insane," he whispered. "No one will believe I'd agree to this." "You will agree to it," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because if you don't, that first file, the one detailing your affair and the financial fraud, gets leaked. Not to the courts, but to Page 6 and the SEC. Your company is already unstable due to this divorce. A scandal of this magnitude, embezzling corporate funds to sabotage your own wife, a sordid affair with a family friend, will trigger a morals clause with your investors. The board will oust you. Your reputation will be destroyed beyond repair. This document allows you to control the narrative. It frames you as a man making amends. The alternative is utter ruin. The choice was clear controlled demolition or a catastrophic explosion." Arthur Finch, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost, leaned over and whispered to his client. "Take the deal, Damien. For God's sake, take the deal." Damien looked across the table one last time at the woman he thought he owned. He finally understood the true meaning of the prenup. It had never been about protecting his assets from her. It had been a lie she had signed, a promise he had made, and its spectacular breach was now the instrument of his downfall. Word of the mediation's outcome spread like wildfire through the rarefied air of New York's financial elite. Damien Blackwood, the titan of real estate, had not just been defeated in his divorce. He had been systematically disemboweled. The settlement terms were leaked, anonymously, of course, but with the surgical precision that pointed directly to Victoria Croft's office. The 50% asset split was shocking enough, but it was the other clauses that caused the real stir. The $100 million canvas foundation was seen as a brilliant act of poetic justice. The public apology, when it was eventually published in the Wall Street Journal, was a masterpiece of corporate legalese that still managed to be a profound humiliation. It spoke of regrettable actions and a failure to support a partner's ambitions, effectively painting Damien as the villain in his own life story. But the most devastating blow, the one that shook the foundations of his company, was the clause regarding his unborn child. The heir to Blackwood Holdings would be a Thorne Sterling, not a Blackwood, and his or her controlling interest would be managed by a trust overseen by Sebastian Thorne's people. In effect, Damien had signed away the future of his own company to the family of the woman he had scorned. The news sent a shockwave through the Blackwood Holdings boardroom. The board members, already jittery about the divorce's impact on the company's stability, were now in open panic. Their CEO had not only lost half his fortune, but had also ceded long-term control of the company to an outside and infinitely more powerful entity. His compromised, plain and simple, fumed Cole Vandermeer, a long-time board member, and Damien's one-time friend and rival in a hushed phone call. His judgment is shot. Who in their right mind agrees to terms like that? He's put his personal mess ahead of his fiduciary duty to this company. The sentiment was universal. Damien had become a liability. His personal life was no longer personal. It was a contagion threatening to infect their entire portfolio. This was the moment Sebastian Thorne had been waiting for. He had not needed to short the stock or buy up debt. The truth, wielded expertly by Genevieve and Victoria, had done more damage than any market manipulation could have. Now it was time for the final elegant checkmate. Through a series of quiet backdoor channels, Thorne's family office began reaching out to the key members of the Blackwood Holdings board. They didn't make threats. They offered a solution, a vision of stability. They proposed a restructuring. They suggested that with the Thorne Sterling Trust positioned to be the future majority shareholder, it was only logical that the company begin to align itself with Thorne's interests sooner rather than later. They hinted at the possibility of lucrative partnerships with Ethelred Technologies, access to capital markets Damien could only dream of. They offered the board a choice sink with the disgraced Damien Blackwood, or soar with the legendary Sebastian Thorne. The coup was swift and bloodless. Cole Vandermeer, seeing the writing on the wall, led the charge. An emergency board meeting was called. Damien, haggard and visibly diminished, walked in to find a room full of faces that were no longer friendly or deferential. They were cold, calculating, and unified against him. Damien Cole began dispensing with any pretense of friendship. "We've reviewed the terms of your settlement. We've considered its long-term implications for the company, and we have lost confidence in your ability to lead." Damien tried to fight. He blustered about his contributions, how he had built the company from nothing. He reminded them of the profits they had all enjoyed, but his words were hollow, the desperate pleas of a king who had already been deposed. "The trust that will control the future of this company is managed by Thorne's people, Damien," another board member pointed out coldly. "We have a duty to the shareholders to work with the future, not cling to the past. The board has voted. We are asking for your resignation as CEO effective immediately." Stunned into silence, Damien looked around the room at the men who had once been his allies. He saw no sympathy, only a ruthless pragmatism he had once admired and now despised. He was being erased from his own company, from his own legacy. In a last desperate act, he tried to reach Genevieve. He bypassed the lawyers and called her personal number, which he was shocked to find she hadn't changed. She answered on the second ring. "What do you want, Damien?" Her voice was calm, devoid of the hatred or triumph he might have expected. It was simply detached. "They're pushing me out." "Jen," he said, his voice cracking. "The board, they're forcing my resignation." "Is this what you wanted? To destroy me completely?" There was a pause on the line. He could hear her breathe. "I never wanted to destroy you, Damien. I just wanted to be free of you. I wanted you to understand what you took from me. Everything that's happening now, this is not my doing. This is the consequence of your own actions. You built your empire on a foundation of control and deceit. You can't be surprised when it crumbles. But my company, my name, it was never just about you," she said softly. "You made it about legacy, about our child. Well, our child will now be protected. Their future will be secure, overseen by people who value more than just profit margins. Perhaps they'll build something better in its place." He had nothing left to say. He had lost his wife, his fortune, his company, and his heir. He had underestimated Genevieve Sterling at every turn, and it had cost him everything. He hung up the phone, a truly broken man alone in the gleaming, empty office of an empire that was no longer his. 6 months later, the New York City skyline was painted in the soft hues of a spring afternoon. From the 50th floor office of a sleek, modern skyscraper in the heart of Midtown, Genevieve Thorne Sterling watched the city buzz with life below. The office was not the cold, impersonal museum of Damien's penthouse. It was warm, filled with light, vibrant contemporary art, and the quiet hum of purpose. A simple, elegant plaque on the glass door read, "The Canvas Foundation." The divorce was finalized. The public apology had been published and had faded from the news cycle as all scandals eventually do. Blackwood Holdings had been quietly restructured with a new CEO approved by the Thorne Trust and a board that was now more aligned with Silicon Valley innovation than with cutthroat real estate deals. Damien had faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties, having accepted a multi-million-dollar severance to simply disappear. Genevieve, now heavily pregnant, moved with the serene confidence of a woman who had fought a war and won. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a creator. The Canvas Foundation had launched with a clarity of vision that had stunned the philanthropic world. In its first few months, it had already funded a dozen promising startups, founded by women, from a revolutionary art restoration technology to a digital platform for poets. She was actively building the dream Damien had tried to extinguish, but on a scale she had never imagined. Her phone rang, and she smiled as she saw the caller ID. "Hello, Grandpa." Sebastian Thorne's voice, still carrying that quiet, immense authority, came through the line. "Genevieve, I saw the feature on the foundation in Forbes. They called you the art world's most powerful new benefactor. I trust you sent Damien a copy." Genevieve laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. That felt a little too cruel. Even for me. Nonsense. There is no such thing as too cruel when dealing with bullies. He grunted, though she could hear the pride in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "The doctor is happy." "We're both healthy," she said, one hand resting protectively on her stomach, just getting impatient to meet her. They had learned a month ago it was a girl. The news had felt like a final, perfect victory, a new legacy free from the dynastic pressures Damien had sought to impose. "She will be remarkable," Sebastian said, with the certainty of a man who dealt only in absolutes. "She has her mother's strength, and I hope her great-grandfather's impeccable taste in investments." They spoke for a while longer, a comfortable, easy conversation that had become their new normal. She had spent a month with him at his secluded estate in California after the settlement was finalized, reconnecting with the grandfather she had only known through hushed stories. She had learned why he had respected her mother's wish for a normal life, away from the Thorne name, and why he had watched her from a distance, waiting for the day she might need him. He had never wanted to interfere, only to be her safety net. "You know, I could have just given you the money to start this foundation years ago," he mused. "I know," Genevieve said, looking out at the city. "But I wasn't ready then. I had to build my own cage, and then learn how to break out of it before I could build something real." As she ended the call, her assistant knocked on the door. "Your 3 o'clock is here, Missile." "Sterling, it's the 2 young women with the textile sourcing app." "Send them in, please," Genevieve said, rising to her feet. 2 bright, nervous, and brilliant young entrepreneurs walked in, clutching a laptop and a folder full of dreams. As Genevieve shook their hands, her smile warm and encouraging, she saw a flicker of her old self in their eyes, the passion, the ambition, the hope. She was no longer Damien Blackwood's wife, a beautiful object in a gilded cage. She was not even just Sebastian Thorne's granddaughter, the wielder of immense inherited power. Here in this room on the precipice of helping another woman's dream take flight, she was simply Genevieve. A founder, a patron, a mother-to-be. She had not just divorced her husband, she had divorced the life he represented, and in its place, on a foundation of truth and her own unbreakable will, she was building a legacy that was entirely her own. And that's the incredible story of Genevieve Thorne Sterling. It's a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most formidable strength, and that true power isn't about the money you have, but the respect you command. She didn't just win a divorce. She reclaimed her identity, exposed a world of lies, and built a new future from the ashes of her old one. Her story proves that you should never underestimate a woman with a plan, especially when she has nothing left to lose and an entire legacy to build. What did you think of Genevieve's ultimate power move? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this story of transformation and justice as compelling as I did. Please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic revenge, and be sure to subscribe for more tales of incredible people turning the tables. Thanks for listening.